Hey guys, it's Tori, and to start off I want to apologize for the slightly weird lighting that makes my face look red. I don't really know how to fix it, and this is my only chance to film, so we're just gonna go with this. But today I wanted to do my January wrap-up, so I had a pretty good reading month in January, which was great. We were able to kickstart the year pretty well. In fact, all of my reads this month were rated 4 stars or higher, so definitely, like I said, a really good reading month. And we'll just get right into it. So the first book I completed for the year was Frenchmans Creek by Daphne du Maurier. I was reading this for the Past and Future Readathon, specifically for the challenge to read a book set in an era or during an event in history that you haven't read from before. I have not read any books set, I believe this is 1700s, I want to say, and it's dealing with pirates. So I have never read anything like that, so that's why I counted it for that prompt. And I ended up giving this 4 out of 5 stars. It was such a fun read, such a fun little piratey adventure. I found the characters to be very interesting. The main character was very, very interesting, especially because the only other Daphne du Maurier book I've read was Rebecca, and this main character is very different from that main character. And I loved seeing Daphne du Maurier's skill as a writer of characters. I just really enjoyed that. I also loved just the adventure of it, really. It was really a fun romp. It gave me a lot of Pirates of the Caribbean vibes, which I really wanted. It wasn't exactly the same as Pirates of the Caribbean. It doesn't have the same like mythology and supernatural aspects as Pirates of the Caribbean, which is one thing I really like about that series, so I was slightly disappointed in that. But I still really enjoyed this. The only reason it's not a 5 stars is just because I just didn't really connect with it. I also just struggle with stories about cheating in any way, and that's definitely a part of this story. And I just have recently found that that's a big turnoff for a book for me, is if there's cheating involved. I just really struggle with that in books. It doesn't completely destroy the book for me. Obviously, I gave this 4 out of 5 stars still, but it definitely is something that makes it harder for me to give it a 5 stars. In fact, I don't think I've ever read a book that had cheating involved in it that I gave 5 stars unless the cheating was resolved in a good way. But anyway, this was just a really fun read, and I definitely recommend it if you have not read it yet and you're interested in getting into Daphne du Maurier, or more into Daphne du Maurier if you've already started reading her work. Next, I picked up Wars of the Roses, Margaret of Anjou by Conn Iggulden. This is the second book in this series by Conn Iggulden, all about the Wars of the Roses in England. I read this for the prompt to read a friend's favorite author for the Past and Future Readathon. So all these books, I should mention now, I guess, were for the Past and Future Readathon, so I will mention what prompts they all went with. But anyway, this I ended up giving 4.5 out of 5 stars. It was such a good book. The character development was so well done. It's just been fascinating to get to know these characters within this setting. I feel like the Wars of the Roses, one of the things that really draws me to learning about Wars of the Roses and reading about it is the fact that there is really, I can see both sides to this war. Like, it's very easy for me to recognize what both were fighting for and why they were fighting for it. And I feel like there are so many characters, historical figures within the Wars of the Roses that are so complicated and have so many sides to them, and I feel like Conn Iggulden explores that very well in this book. I loved seeing Margaret and how she's changed from the first book, from her early years of reigning to now. With everything that's gone on, she's just really grown as a person a lot. We also see the Duke of York a lot more in this, and it was fascinating to see his, I don't know, inner conflict. And you know, he's a very honorable person, but he also has that desire for power, but also recognizes that the kingdom needs a strong leader. It's not just that he wants power, he also wants the kingdom to have a strong leader, and it just doesn't right now. We were able to get to know Edward, who would later become Edward IV of England, and that was fascinating. And all the little skirmishes within the Wars of the Roses, that it wasn't just Lancaster versus York, but there were also a lot of personal vendettas different people had, and it's just been very, very interesting to explore all of this. I have loved reading this series so far, especially because there's a lot I know about the Wars of the Roses, but there's also so much to it that it takes time to really get into all of it because there's so many working pieces, so many characters, so many people and different vendettas and different beliefs and desires that are being played with throughout the years of the Wars of the Roses, that it takes a lot of time. And I feel like this series, if you're interested in this time period and know very little about it, this series does a great job of really showing the development and really showing all sides of the wars. And I just really enjoyed this, so I'm looking forward to picking up the third one at some point, hopefully soon. And yeah, gave this 4.5 stars. It just wasn't a 5 stars because, I don't know, it just didn't have that piece of it that would really grip me. It was very close though, which is why I gave it 4.5 stars. Sorry about the shine that keeps showing up on it. But anyway, yeah, I just didn't quite get to the point where I was just completely in love with it, if that makes sense. But I still really felt a lot for the way Conn Iggulden is working with this story, and I really love it. And I would not be surprised if Bloodline, the third book in this series, ends up being a 5 stars. So far, the first one I gave 4 stars, this one I gave 4.5, and then the next one maybe I'll end up getting a 5 stars. But anyway, really good. And yeah, that's all I have to say. Okay, so the next prompt I ended up fulfilling was a new format. And for this, I didn't really know what to go with. I thought about reading a book that had stream of consciousness because I haven't really read that. But I ended up going with a play because I really don't read plays very often. And this in particular is written in poetic style, which is even more outside of my comfort zone and not something I read very often. So I decided to count this, and that is Much Ado About Nothing by William Shakespeare. This is my complete works of Shakespeare, but I read Much Ado About Nothing, and I ended up giving this one 4.5 stars as well, 4 stars, I don't know. The thing is, I'm more of a tragedy person. I really like tragedies more than the comedies for Shakespeare, but this was definitely my favorite comedy that I've read so far. It even beat out A Midsummer Night's Dream, which I loved, but this one just got me. And what really made it almost a 5 stars for me was Benedict and, oh my gosh, what's her name? Beatrice, which I believe a lot of people really like their relationship, and just add me to that list. I loved it. Really, the story itself was probably just about a 4 star, maybe even a 3 star, but Benedict and Beatrice just got me. I really loved their relationship and their character dynamics so much. I want to watch the film with Kenneth Branagh and, oh, what's her name? Emma Thompson. Gosh, I can't remember anybody's names right now, apparently. But anyway, I really enjoyed this. It was just fun and interesting. And again, those two characters are so interesting to me. This play made me laugh. I always appreciate when a Shakespearean comedy actually makes me laugh, and I felt like this one did a good job. Like I said, it's become my favorite of his comedies, and I think it's because there's a little more depth to it that I can appreciate. I feel like A Midsummer Night's Dream, you can find depth if you look for it, but I don't know. I feel like the characters in Much Ado About Nothing are a little more developed than they are in A Midsummer Night's Dream. So anyway, this is definitely my new favorite comedy by Shakespeare, probably followed closely by Twelfth Night and then A Midsummer Night's Dream, if I'm being honest. But anyway, I really enjoyed this one. And if you haven't read it or experienced it in any way, definitely try to, because it is just very good. And yeah, unfortunately, again, I can't give it 5 stars because I prefer the tragedies personally. But in fact, maybe even I could say I prefer the history plays, even though I haven't read very many. I just really like those. But anyway, this was a lot of fun, and I honestly think it would be a good place to start with Shakespeare if you haven't read Shakespeare before, just because it's pretty easy to understand, and there are very interesting characters to keep you engaged beyond just the humor, if that makes sense. The next prompt I fulfilled was a new to me middle grade, and I ended up reading The Girl Who Drank the Moon by Kelly Barnhill, which I ended up giving 5 out of 5 stars. This was fabulous. It was so sweet. This follows a town in which every year they are required to sacrifice the youngest in the town, so the most recently born baby, to a witch that lives in the forest in order to protect themselves. However, the elders within this little protectorate don't actually believe there is a witch. They just sort of leave the child in the woods to die, and they do this in order to keep the town in line, essentially. But little do they know, there actually is a witch. However, this witch is not evil. She's a very good witch, and she doesn't understand why these people keep leaving their babies in the woods. And so she ends up taking care of these children, feeding them starlight, which will give them luck and fortune throughout their lives, and they end up getting adopted out on the other side of the forest. However, one day she brings a child and ends up accidentally feeding this child moonlight instead of starlight, which ends up giving the child magical abilities, and so the witch raises her as her own. We also follow a young boy in the protectorate who is starting to question things that are going on, and things go on from there. It's a very interesting story because you start off with very little information, and you slowly over time get hints of what's going on, and you start being able to put things together in your mind until finally in the end it all comes together and you understand exactly what's going on. And I thought it was very well done, the way the mysteries and everything played out. It was just very, very well organized, plotted. The writing also is so fun to read. It's beautiful without being over the top, if that makes sense, and I felt like it was easy for me to get into as an adult, and I feel like for a middle grade aged person, they would likely get into it pretty well too. It wouldn't be too tricky for them to read. It also deals with a lot of issues involving grief and just suffering and sorrow and hope, and I really loved the exploration of those themes. One thing that I will say about this book that kind of got to me, and it's such a small thing, which is why it's still a 5 stars, because this is not enough to bring it down at all, but there was the head person, the head elder or whatever in this protectorate, had an obsession with dramatically swishing his robes. Right at the beginning, there was this line that was like, he dramatically swished his robes the way he had practiced many times, and I was just like, okay, that's just a little too much. And I always struggle with middle grade books that kind of make adults feel childish, and that sort of line made the adult feel childish. I just prefer middle grade where they treat the adults as adults. They're more mature, they're flawed. I appreciate when they show adults as being flawed, but that doesn't mean they're like acting like children. And I feel like that dramatic swishing like he practiced all these years was just a little over the top for me. Like, okay, that's just, anyway. So that bothered me, and there were a couple other instances where it mentioned his dramatic robe swishing. I just could not with those little comments. But anyway, other than that, it was a really sweet book with great characters. And for a standalone too, it also brought everything together really well. I always love when there's a standalone fantasy that is able to bring together the plot very well, even though it is a standalone. It doesn't need to be expanded upon. I feel like it's possible the author could put more stories within this world, and I think that would be very interesting, just exploring different like myths and legends within this world. It had a very fairy tale-like feel to it, which I really enjoyed. So anyway, it was a great read, and if you haven't read it and you enjoy middle grade, definitely give it a pick up. I will say it hasn't like beat out like Inkheart, for example, is one of my favorite middle grades of all time, but it's still really good, and one that I probably will revisit in the future, and hopefully will get my little brother to read because I think he might enjoy it. And the last book I completed this month, I read for the prompt to read a new to me author, and that was Adam Bede by George Eliot. Now, I made a full vlog of my reading experience with this book, spoiler free, so no worries there, but I will link that down below so you can see all my thoughts. But suffice it to say, I gave it 5 out of 5 stars. For a lot of the book, I thought it was going to be a 4-star read, but it ended up being a 5-star, and I really enjoyed it. It has great characters, great writing, and I'm looking forward to reading more by George Eliot in the future. I am so glad that I ended up enjoying her because I really, really wanted to. I just wasn't sure if she would be for me, but I wanted her to be for me, and she ended up doing the job. So great read. and probably going to be a favorite of the year. Okay, so that is it for what I read in January. I'm going to show really quickly a couple books that I'm currently working on now at the end of the month, and that will carry into February, and then this video will be over. So anyway, the first book I'm currently working on is Bellman in Black by Diane Setterfield. I don't have the dust jacket on right now because I'm reading it, and I don't like reading it with the dust jacket on. But anyway, I'm about 200 pages in. It's just over 300 pages, so I don't have very much left to read, but it's been a few days since I even worked on it just because I suddenly was in a mood. It wasn't like a reading slumpy mood necessarily. It was just I have been watching WandaVision and I really wanted to watch the Marvel movies, and I don't have enough time right now in life to do both reading and watching things. So mostly over the past several months I've been reading a lot, which I'm glad about. But I was just in a movie watching mood, so I didn't have time to read, which was, again, totally fine. It just happens. And I call it not a reading slump because it's not like I wasn't in the mood to read. It's just I preferred to watch some Marvel movies more. So anyway, so that's what I've been doing instead with more of my free time. But I'm hoping to finish this at least within the first week of February. I'm not gonna push myself too much. I'm kind of letting myself read when I want to because I don't want it to feel like a chore, especially because school right now is pretty overwhelming. So I'm kind of taking it slow, but I still would like to finish this by the end of the first week of February if possible, just so that I can keep up with my Goodreads goal. But anyway, there's that. And then I technically started this on the 1st of February, but I'm gonna mention it here because I'm currently reading it. So anyway, that is The Brontes by Juliet Barker. I'm actually buddy reading this with Emily from Novelle Novels, and it's fabulous so far. I'm literally only like 20 pages in, and today I'll be able to get through chapter 1. Which will be exciting. But anyway, it's really good so far. Not much to say about it. It's mostly following the Brontes' father, Patrick Bronte. And yeah, we're going to be reading this actually over 3 months or so. So February, April, February, March, April. And so I will be continuing to mention this periodically throughout that time, I'm sure. But yeah, so I'm excited to be working on this. And then I'm also working on a biography of Thomas Cromwell by, I can't remember who it's by, but here's a picture so that you can see it. And I'll also mention it in the description box below. But this is also going decently well. I'm listening to this on audiobook. And unfortunately, I've been kind of all over the place with what I want to listen to, and I want to get through this really bad, but it's lost me a few times. There's a lot of discussion of like people I don't know about, so it's a little harder for me to follow this one, which is why I think I haven't been listening to it as much. But hopefully by the end of February I'll at least finish that one audiobook and have it be my first audiobook of the year. But anyway, so that's what I've read, what I'm currently reading, and let me know down below what you're reading, what you read in January, and if you've read any of these books and your thoughts on them, as I would love to know, and I will talk to you next time. Bye!